Well, I expect you heard all about that. Birds is what this program is all about today, birds and flying things in general. And I thought that you might like to have a look at this house martin. Same family as sand martins and swallows. And this is a martlet. In the 11th century, they were called martlets, and indeed they still are in some parts of England today. Especially in Sussex, they've got it on the county badge. And this is rather fun. When you think of the town of Arundel, which has a martlet on the corporation seal, the French word for swallow is hirondelle. Hirondelle, Arundel. Perhaps, why not? Anyway, we are going to make a martlet in paper sculpture, and these are the bits that you would need to do it. Now, I know you can't take all that in very quickly, just like that. So if you want a fact sheet, well, you send us a stamped addressed envelope, we'll send you the fact sheet. So I'm going to start by showing you the simplest and the hardest bits to make the martlet. Then in the middle bits, you're going to have to work out for yourself. Now, this is a tiny upper wing, and what I'm doing here is what is called scoring, which is to not cut through, but make an indent where you want it, in a curve like that. That's done with a rather blunt knitting needle, which is very safe. Now, if I just give a little fold to it like that, it becomes three-dimensional and looks quite good. Now for the really tricky one, and that's the head of the bird. Here we are. We need a circle looking rather like a target, and on the back we need a little bit of double-sided tape, and I'm going to cut that side of the tape, if I can find the place, there, and cut into the center, and again about an inch along here to the center, and now I'm going to cut out that middle circle. Best to do it as neatly as you can. There. Now I have scored that circle there, so I should be able to bend. Go all the way around, quite gently, like that. And if you've got the two middle ends well bent like that, you just check where the sticky bit was, which is there. So we know that if I bring those two bits around like that, get it to the center, press together, and we've got the head. Another very easy bit is the little beak there, also with sticky stuff on it. And we can hide that connecting bit there by putting the beak on there. And because of the shape of the thing, that too will be three-dimensional. Fine. We'll go on now with the body part, which is this, looking terribly like a fish. That's the bit we did in the first place. But we will now put head on about there, and a wing, which is made in the same way as that one, except that there are two score marks there, so that it gets that shape, and we will attach that like that. Now, here's a funny bit, isn't it? That makes the whole sort of leg and foot unit, and by squeezing like that, we get the right shape, which goes in the V shape there. There we are, all ready. Oh, just one more tip. If you want to display them on something, stick them on the background, here's a very good idea. If you just put a little piece of polystyrene or cork on the back with some double-sided sticky tape, that raises it and makes it much easier to put on a background. So we'll do that now. If I put one of those there, I have another couple, and one there. And of course, that's the position for the final one. Not bad at all. Have you, I wonder, seen one of these? Glitter paint in a tiny little plastic bottle, and you pipe it out onto whatever you want to pipe it out on. The best thing, of course, is a dark background. Then it shows up very, very well, like that. Now, this is silver glitter paint, and as it dries, it gets brighter and brighter. And I rather suspect that you have, by now, worked out what it is that I'm making. It's a web, of course, and so many insects get caught in a web. I've even seen wasps caught in a spider's web, let alone flies and other tiny little flying insects. But the interesting thing is that the spider is not an insect. He's an arachnida, got 8 legs. We all seem to think, oh, I don't like spiders, horrible insects, but they're not insects. So there we are. We've all learnt something. And I'll just finish off the way in which he weaves his web. And then we'll do something a bit more exciting. There we are, spider's web piped on there. Now that, as it dries, gets very hard. Something else happens. The background that I've got here has green ink on the black background. You can see that, can't you? You can see a nice bit of green down there. I'm going to take that away, put this one on, because it's hardened and it's dry now. And if I move it about, it ought to catch the light for you. And we can see very well that it really is a rather lovely thing. Now, it has another advantage. Because it's dry, and we can actually feel it through that flimsy paper, we can make a rubbing, which I shall now proceed to do. You could use any sort of wax crayon to do this, any colour. Black shows up, of course, extremely well. In fact, I'm not using wax crayon. I'm using something called heel ball, which is the stuff you use to make a brass rubbing. It's awfully good and well worth getting hold of a piece, and it will last you for ages and ages. Now I think we'll draw a spider in our web. And he's constructed like this. He would have a little tiny head, and those 2 little pieces that come there. And because he's not an insect, he doesn't have 3 parts to his body. He has a head and he has an abdomen, which also acts as a thorax as well. And how many legs does he have? Just so. Well, there are 2 of them. Now he has 4. Coming down, 6 and 8. And there is our little spider. Well, you try using that glitter paint. I think you'll have a great deal of fun with it. This is fauna, which is all about animals. And here is a big one. An African elephant, of course. You can see by the great big ear, got a broken tusk. And this was done in pastel pencils, 4 of them, different colours. But this drawing had a colour wash over it to help. And it wasn't done in the field, as it were. That was done in the studio at home. But I did make a lot of rough drawings, which is very, very helpful when you come to do the finished work. And I've got them here. You can see different little elephants, back view and whatever you can get, because they move about all the time. And that is the one from which I made the final drawing. And here are more, very rough, but at least they give you an idea of how they move. And you do a lot of wrong lines too, but that doesn't really matter. And here there are quite a lot of wrong lines, as you can see, but it gives the sort of way in which they are constructed, and it's very, very helpful indeed. Now, what I thought we'd do now is to draw 2 elephants. One, a realistic elephant, and the other a cartoon one. And to do that, I've got a way of doing it that you might find helpful. I'm going to draw a couple of rectangles to put them in, and put a smallish egg shape there and there, and a much larger one there. That's how we'll start this one. And the first thing that you notice is a trunk that comes right down to the ground, and then a shape like this up in the head, because a tusk, if he has one, would come out there. Then we come over the head, and in the case of an African elephant, we get an ear, rather like that. And that delightful, humorous, twinkling little elephant eye would appear up there. The egg has dropped a bit there for an elephant. His body would start much higher and come down over the back to a tail, and we would come down to a leg there. We'll go back to that. Now, elephants have extremely long legs, and you can see that on my colour drawing. A bit of darkness in odd places where the shadow caught him. And we'd also see a lot of texture because elephants have a mighty lot of it. Well, there we are. Now, that is quite a realistic elephant. Now we'll get on with the funny one. Start in the head, but go out there. Come back, put in a funny eye. Ah, a lady elephant. And an ear like that. And a body that comes down there with a tail. But this time, whoosh, we come down here and make the tiniest little stubby legs and toenails. And there we are, a very funny little elephant. And the ridiculous thing is that we talk about exaggerating in cartooning. I showed you, the elephant has long, long legs, and yet we don't exaggerate them and make them longer for the funny drawing. We make them squat little legs, but we accept it, and we like it, and we find it fun. Well, that looked like a very nice day in Margate. Now, I'm cutting out a little character so that I can tell you a story about King Midas. It's a fable. And Midas had done a great favour to one of the Greek gods. His name was Dionysus. And Dionysus had said to Midas, well, thank you very, very much. You can have any wish you like. Well, I don't know if you remember, but Midas said, I would like to be able to have anything that I touch turn to gold. Well, Dionysus didn't really think it was a very good idea, but being a god and having said he could have anything, he had to. So he said, well, I don't think it's a terribly good idea, Midas, but when the sun rises in the morning, you will have your wish. So when the sun rose in the morning, Midas woke up, ready to make his golden touch. Do you see how I've made him so that he can move about like that? Nice way to tell a story, I think. And so, of course, he was going to touch his rose. And when he touched the rose, it turned to gold. Of course, he was absolutely delighted to see that he had his power. And then he saw that bowl of fruit and the bread, and he thought, I'll touch that too. And when he touched that, it turned to gold. It really was very exciting. Midas got dressed and went to see what else he could do with his golden touch. I think when he saw the palace cat, he probably had forgotten because he said, morning, Tiddles, and touched him. And he turned to gold. He thought that was really rather funny. But then he saw his daughter's little doll. He thought she'll love to have a real golden doll. But of course, when he touched it, it turned to gold. Trouble was, his little daughter didn't like it. She didn't want a heavy golden doll. Poor old Midas. He went over to console his daughter, and she turned to gold. Well, this was appalling. Poor Midas. The only thing he could do was to go back to Dionysus, and he'd say, I'm afraid you were right. Can you help me? And Dionysus said, yes, we can. Go down to the river, our river, get a pitcher of water, take it back to the palace, and just let water pour over all the things you want to turn back from gold. So, when he got back to the palace, he took up a position where he could pour water. And what I've done is to make him rather like I did when he was in bed, so that he can tip the water, you see. And if I make it like that, we could then put in some paper to make it look as though the water is pouring out of the pitcher. like that. And as the water came onto all the golden things that were there, one after another, they all turned back to how they were before. So everyone was happy again. But what worries me is when Midas had the golden touch, when he was dressing and whatever he was doing, why didn't he turn himself to gold? Ah, well, it was a fable, and anything can happen in a fable.